All right, so just to continue with the story. So, as I said, I moved from being a left winger back to a right winger, but I'd gotten in arguments with my grandpa because my grandpa, um, he was saying, I was upset because he was saying that, he talked to my dad and he wanted my dad to talk to me, but he said my dad will not talk to me. Now my grandpa was telling me though, so but I didn't really believe him because I could tell my grandpa didn't have respect for me, and I didn't feel like he probably did a good job trying to persuade my dad to talk to me. So and then even my grandpa, I would talk to my grandpa would be like, yeah, Ryan, well, if you're in the flow, you're not attached to anybody, and nobody's really your family, not even your dad and your mom. You're one with everybody. And so I felt like he was trying to get me to, you know, to accept that my dad's not going to talk to me, and try to use that spiritual language like, oh, you're not attached to anybody, you're in the flow, and you're one with everything. So don't, why are you attached to your dad? Why are you attached to your mom? Why do you want to talk to them? Is they're my dad and my mom. And I tried to explain that to him, like, and he was like, and he didn't want um my mom and dad to even, he didn't want them to give me any money because he wanted to make me independent. Because he would say, if you're in a, if you are, um, he'd say if you're in the flow, you don't have ally enemy software, and if you have ally enemy software, then if you're dependent on someone, you have ally enemy software, because if they do what you want, then they're your ally. If they don't do what you want, then they're your enemy. So he wanted me to be independent, but and he was saying like if you have a job, then it's like the hero's journey, and you expand your awareness. And he's saying being lazy is not the flow, because laziness is self-confirmatory. And but the thing was, I wasn't lazy. I was working my ass off on the Quadrant model. I was working on it really good. Now, but he was also saying, and then you will develop your competencies, and once you're competent, and you get jobs and stuff, and you become competent in something, then then you'll be more in the flow. And because competencies are linked to the flow, and then people won't put you down, and and so, and you'll also be a part of the synergy of the universe. And I'll get to that more later when he got into all that. But I was like, but I felt again like he was trying to get my mom and dad to abandon me, and that's the way my mom and dad interpreted it. And I wrote in my first based on true story book that's what I felt like, that they're not talking to me and stuff was linked to um was linked to their right, kind of like a right wing orientation that I felt my grandpa kind of gave them, even though my grandpa said that they misinterpreted his teachings, and they're not in the flow, and they had predator prey software, and they're stubborn. He would say that, or he would say that they're not stubborn, but they're software, because he would never personalize it, because you are not a person. Everything is one, right? And there is no person. He's a transpersonal psychologist, transcending the personal. But I felt like he made things worse, and as he said, he cast pearls of swine. So, but as I said, he started moving me more toward. So we got in an argument about that, and then he stopped teaching me. But before he stopped teaching me, I was moving more into the right wing orientation. Now, before this was about the time when I moved from San Diego to back to Los Angeles, and I remember I went on a road trip at one point with my friend Francisco at that time, and this was at the time when my grandpa stopped teaching me because we got in an argument, and um and in that argument, I was talking about, like, I was resentful because he's saying, if you're in the flow, you're not attached, and so no one's your family, so don't be attached to your mom and dad. And I felt like he was, that my mom and dad were taking that same type of stuff, like, oh yeah, we're not attached to Ryan, let's get rid of him. Like, I felt like his spiritual teachings just ended up being like very abusive toward me. Like, he set up terrible conditions, and I talked about that from the very beginning, how his, like, yeah, no talking about the past, and you have to accept bad calls, and everything is just fine even when things aren't just fine. And then they'd be like, Ryan, yeah, accept bad calls, you have to accept our calls, everything is just fine. And they'd be treating me bad, and they use his spiritual teachings as like ammo to hurt me. And I felt like it was like a right-wing orientation, like a lack of compassion, right? But as I described, um I went to I went on that road trip with my friend Francisco. This was after my grandpa stopped teaching me because we got in an argument. And during that road trip I started to rap. And I've been telling people for a long time, like, I can only rap when I'm playing serious basketball and only when I'm nervous. So on that road trip, we went far away, and I started getting nervous because we were so far away from home, and I never knew that that was the case for me. I always knew when I was nervous I could rap well. And my grandpa would be like, well, it's not because you're nervous. It's because you have a high level of aliveness. And he'd always, like, not understand. No, it's because I'm nervous. But he'll, no, it's because you have a high level of aliveness. When you have a high level of aliveness, you could rap well. No, you don't know. You think you know everything, but you don't know. So I go on the road trip, and I'm able to rap really well. So I'm doing freestyles, and I'm writing these raps. And then, you know, and I felt like, you know, maybe my family saw the raps and stuff. And I was saying, like, you know, I need help with my leg because I had a hurt leg at the time. And I needed help with my leg so I get back into basketball. And I was saying, and look how good I can rap. And I can only rap like this if I'm playing serious basketball. And this is evidence. Look, I'm far away from home. And notice how I can rap well because I'm far away from home and I'm nervous. So I do the raps, and then I call my sister. My sister answered for the first time in forever, maybe because she saw that I was doing the raps and she was impressed. But I told her, I was like, can I please talk to mom and dad? So I talked to her for a little bit, and then she hung up, and then she blocked me. And I wasn't able to talk to my mom and dad. So then I get back home, and then eventually there was like a transvestite guy living above me, and I had him clean out my apartment, and he ended up like stealing him and this like other guy who was on meth. Like I described, I was in apparently like the worst neighborhood in Escondido, and my one of my computers ended up missing, and I think that one of them stole it. So I got in an argument with them, and I ended up just leaving San Diego, and I started living in my car and I wanted to see my mom and dad, right? And then yeah, so that was so I was living in my car for a little bit, and as I described, I tried to see my mom and dad. I tried to have my grandma help me, and then I got a restraining order because my sister wouldn't let me in the house. So I threw some pots against their house. Well, by this time, my mom and dad moved to Texas, but I still had the restraining order at my grandma's house. So I needed help with my leg. I wanted help with my leg, but no one was helping me, and I couldn't go to my grandma. And my grandpa wasn't talking to me anymore, and I wanted help. I needed help with my leg. I wanted to get back into basketball, and I wanted to talk to my mom and dad, and my dad's a doctor. I wanted him to help me, but he wouldn't talk to me. So at that point, at that point, I had started going from left wing back to right wing, though, and I described a part of the reason why was because of this conversations I was having with my grandpa. One of the conversations was my grandpa was saying that I was a communist before. Like I had become leftist again, right? I had become leftist communist, and I was asking my grandpa, like, well, I thought the Bible was communist. So I was like, Jesus says, like, don't worry, don't work, because look at the lilies of the field. They don't worry, they don't work, and look. So I was like, yeah, I was like a hippie, like, yeah, let's be like Bob Marley, and Bob Marley, communist, like everyone mixed, like, and just don't worry, be happy. And again, my grandpa was trying to force me to get a job. Now he didn't know I was working hard on the quadrant model, right? But in his mind, I was just being lazy, and as he said that, he thought that I just had an unstable ego, and I was just trying to stay dependent on my parents, and that's what he thought. Again, he didn't understand the quadrant model, and he was like, "No, everything's energy, and the quadrant model doesn't make sense. My theory of everything's energy." So, but I asked him, like, well, what do you think about this story about the lilies of the field and stuff that Jesus said? Like, isn't this communist? Like, we should all just get along, and we should all just relax and chill out, kind of like Bob Marley-esque, hippie-ish. But my grandpa was like, well, that's not the flow, because, being lazy and not working, people work to not work. Like it takes work to not work. Like, and they try, and that's still not the flow. They haven't transcended the self. And like the hippies, they're still focused on the self, but they're trying to, they're trying to not try, and that's still a form of trying. So they haven't really transcended the self. So I was like, okay, well, this makes kind of sense. And so he's moving me more toward that right-wing orientation. Like, yeah, you have to work hard. Working hard is important. And I'm going to get more into how he did that. And that he moved me more toward the right wing again, right? And I started thinking, okay, well, so he's a right winger. He's a right winger. Okay. So I didn't really quite understand what his teachings were. And I'll get more to how I move more to right wing again. But, he's teaching me the stuff from the Bible, and it's making me, like one other example was Paul said, be content. So I was like, yeah, Grandpa, just be content. Like, what's up with, your thing? Like, you should work hard, just working hard, then you get in the flow, and that's important. It's important to work hard and go all out and stuff. And I'm like, that's a part of the flow, because then you lose yourself. And I was like, well, Paul says just be content, right? But then my grandpa's like, no, Paul's not saying. He's saying, like, don't make things happen. And I wanted to look at like the shoot away machine like that my dad got me and be like, well, that was him trying to make things happen, right? My grandpa was like, yeah, that was an example of that. But my grandpa was like, yeah, being content. He's not saying like to just be a hippie and just like sit around and do nothing. He's saying, just don't try to make things happen. Be content. But it doesn't mean to like sit around and be lazy. He said, being an entrepreneur, expanding your awareness, growing, and all that's important. That's a part of the flow. Otherwise, if you're trying not to try, that's still, and that you're still not in the flow. That's still self-confirmatory. You're still in the self. So he's moving me more toward the right wing orientation. And yeah, and I'll get more into everything that happened with that. But so I ended up going back to Los Angeles, and eventually my mom gave me an apartment in Los Angeles, but where there's an alley where there's constant noise. It's a bad apartment, okay? But she ended up giving me an apartment. My grandma and my mom ended up buying me one. So I ended up staying in Los Angeles. I spent a long time living in my car, but then they gave me a place in Los Angeles. And I had to do that anger management stuff from when my sister wouldn't let me in the house. So I threw the pots against the door. And also I do anger management at my aunt's house when I was saying I want to see my dad. And my aunt called me a baby. Like, why do you want to see your daddy? And again, my aunt was like on my grandpa's side too, because my aunt was like, didn't your grandpa teach you not to talk about the past when I wanted to get my basketball videos? And even my grandpa said it's okay for me to get my basketball videos. But she, everyone was getting stuff from my grandpa, and they were all misinterpreting it. And it made my life hellish. So then then I was in Los Angeles, and I'd become more a right winger again, because my grandpa was teaching me this stuff like, work hard, and, that's what the flow is, and all that. And I started, and I moved away from that whole like, anti-white stuff. And I started to become a right winger again. And I remember I liked Donald Trump when he got elected, and I became a right winger. It's kind of like pro-white again, right? So that's what happened around like 2016 time. And I'll get to what happened next. But eventually my grandpa started teaching me again. And it took a long time. I'm not going to get into all the details of all the drama that ended up happening, but it was very devastating for me when he wasn't teaching me, because I still didn't understand the flow at this time. And he still hadn't taught me well. And it took and I wanted to learn more. And it took a while for him to start teaching me again, but he ended up starting to teach me again. And I'll get to how he ended up making me even more right wing. So I became very, very right wing, and that was until about 2020. And then at 2020, I went to being a left wing communist again. So I went from being a right wing nationalist to a left wing communist in 2020. So my whole life I was a left wing communist. Then around 2014, I became a right wing nationalist, pro white. Then at about like 2015, I went back to being a communist, anti white. Then I went to being, in like 2016, I went back to being a right winger, pro-white, and then all the way up to like 2020. In 2020, I went back to being a communist, anti-white. So I'll get into that.